Good.
Okay.
We apologize for the technical difficulties. Clearly, if we understood what was wrong, we would have fixed it. So we switched out laptops and we're working with strange equipment. Um, we've had a couple of weeks since we met last, and that couple of weeks we've had a chance to ponder what we've done in the 7 sessions that we've done. And we've learned a lot from them. We've learned a lot about our process and a little bit more what our intent is. The goal is to create new stories and also to see where creativity comes from. And one of the things that we've learned for certain is creativity happens in the empty area. You go into the realm where nothing else exists, that's empty, and you make connections that haven't existed before, and out of that, stories spring out. Sometimes they spring out whole, sometimes they spring out in pieces, and they can be puzzled together afterwards. And as I look through my own creativity, I begin to recognize that's pretty much how it works. Sitting alone in a corner, with a ream of paper and a typewriter doesn't lead to creativity. The ideal is to have a community to interact with. And even a Zoom community is a community, and we have a couple of actually flesh and blood people here who also represent a community. So we're going to change the format a little bit. I will begin by reviewing the story that emanated from the last session and the stepping stones that led to that story so that one can see the process. And then I will read as a story the development of that story. There's a difference between writing a story and becoming a story, and we'll see if I can make that clear in the next few minutes. So what happened last time was we talked for a while. There was a good bit of concern with a hurricane. We had one. Perhaps you can remember that far back. It didn't affect us here in South Florida very much, but some of us were affected who were on the screen. And then we opened to Buber at random, and we found this story. I'll read the story. Rabbi Hirsch once said to his Hasidim, when a man rises in the morning and sees that God has returned his soul to him and that he has become a new creature, he should turn singer and sing to God. My holy master, that's one statement. My holy master, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, had a chassid who, whenever he came to the words in the morning prayer, my God, the soul you have placed in me is pure, danced and broke into a song of praise. Well, we read the story, and there didn't seem to be that much difference between the two statements. And then we divided into pairs. In pairs, each pair came back with a slightly different understanding. That's what happens when one studies in pairs. I was learning with a fairly new chaver, a fairly new study colleague, and we're learning, for him, really, really difficult Hebrew text, really beyond his level to do. But I know that that's where I started. So, and now I read those texts fluently, so we start him there too. And as we were leaving, he said, should I prepare for next week? And I said, no, you can't do this yourself. On the other hand, go ahead and try and see what happens. Well, what happens when one learns really difficult stuff like that by oneself, one becomes self-delusional. One thinks, well, I understood it. But the truth is, when you sit in Chavrusa and you begin to pull it apart, you realize you didn't understand it at all. It's only when two intellects tug and pull with each other that the knot begins to unravel and you can see through it. So some material, it's best not to prepare, it's best to come fresh. So those of us who are deciding in person, who are participating in person, divided into pairs, and Zoom had breakout rooms. And this was the feedback we received. One participant: after an uncontrollable event, our only option is to renew our souls and move forward. For the survivors of the hurricane, there might be an expression of gratitude for survival. Take what has happened and do our best with what we have left. One thought. Another thought. This relates to the opening line of the daily liturgy, Moda Ani. If you're alive, be joyful, be dancing. And then related that to the discipline of reciting 100 blessings a day, finding 100 positive things for which one could say a blessing. Another began to distinguish between the two statements in the story, analyzing the first sentence before the second. I criticized that. I said, this isn't Talmud study, where one has to understand the opening statement before contemplating the second. I said, better that Hasidic teachings be taken as a whole, allowing the piece to play through you, even if you might not understand the beginning, see the whole before analyzing the parts. We came back to that. Rabbi Adam here considered the upcoming fast day, Yom Kippur, in light of the story. And the connecting thread is the notion of the soul, the exposure of the soul, because of the uncontrollable elements of nature, attaining a state of vulnerability. The vulnerability one experiences on Yom Kippur continues into the festival of Sukkot, when one surrenders and experiences joy from even the smallest things. And another participant compared the story to the movable feast. All of life is a rolling feast, and we get to delight at every course. Another allowed for analog and digital approaches to the main manifestations of nature. One could feel the abundance of the immovable feast, or one could feel each element of loss as one encounters the disaster. I return to the observation that the story comes in two parts. I regretted of my admonition. The first might be the statement of the Misnaged, the opponent of Hasidim, who senses an obligation with the word should. He should be joyful. And the second experienced it differently. He was part of the wave, going with the flow. And when that person came to the words Modeh Ani, he spontaneously experienced joy. It wasn't a matter of should. And so we thought that a story might develop from these different approaches to the same stimuli. In both statements, one hunkers down and trembles at the destructive force passing overhead. But as they emerge, one recognizes how awful the destruction is and is moved to express Moda Ani because she is still alive. The other emerges to see beyond the destruction the beauty that is still in the world. It is her nature because she expressed Moda Ani every day of her life when things have been going well and when things have not. For her, life is the flow of a wave, and for the other person, it's a series of particles. And then I said, this is not quite a story. And Adam said, why not? Well, the real answer was because I didn't feel it was a story. Okay. But I said, it is the kernel of a story, and it needs work to deepen it. So when it is told, a story has to draw the listener into the experience. In other words, a story isn't simply a statement of facts and logic. That's closer to didactic teaching. There's nothing wrong with didactic teaching, but that's not a story. The story is something you remember and then share with your friend. By the way, I heard a story. And then you share the story. And every time you tell the story, you learn a little bit more from it. Now, people share didactic teachings too. But a didactic teaching can be shared with somebody who is at the level to receive it, where the story can be shared with all levels, because everybody is at a level at which he or she can learn from the story. So what happened was, in the days that followed, this became the story. And this is the story. After the story, we'll take a few minutes in pairs and consider, what I've shared with you, and consider the story, and to see if I'm most interested if you can hear the difference between a story and the process that led up to the story. The title of the story is After the Storm. Stories have good titles. Moshe and Miriam were neighbors. Moshe considered himself religious. Upon awakening, he knew he was to say Modeh Ani, which he understood to mean, I am thankful before you, a living and present king, that you have compassionately restored my soul to me. Great is your faith. He always recited the words unerringly. He always unwittingly emphasized the first person, the I and the my and the me. It never occurred to him to question the last phrase. Great is your faith. Great is your faith in what? Now, Miriam did not consider herself religious, but nonetheless, she too said Modeh Ani upon awakening, which she understood to mean, I am thankful before you, a living and present king, that you have compassionately restored my soul to me. Great is your faith. And after many years of reciting Modeh Ani, she added some words. Great is your faith in me. But even though her expression resolved into an awareness of herself, her emphasis was always on the you and the your. Now, the neighborhood suffered a massive hurricane. All night the winds roared as they both hunkered down, fearful for their lives. Upon surviving the night, they each recited the Modeh Ani, each thankful their bodies were still intact. They emerged from their homes to witness the devastation. Moshe was overwhelmed. Trees down everywhere, homes damaged, vehicles overturned. His initial response was, for this I should be thankful? How are we ever going to recover from this? Miriam also witnessed the destruction. Her initial response was, there is still much for which to be thankful, and together we will recover from this. Now, that's the story in its current state. It will evolve from there, but that's a story.
It's a beautiful story.
He says it's a beautiful story, but he's sitting right next to me. He has no choice. Shall we? We're not too large a group. Shall we break into pairs?
You could definitely do that. Yeah.
You got a pair here. So your job is actually to talk with each other about what you just heard, what you just learned, and the difference between the lead up to the story and to the point where the story transforms and becomes a story, and anything else at all, like the Phillies and Houston. Okay. So go ahead and do that for a few minutes. We'll take 6 minutes.
All right, I'm splitting everybody up into breakout rooms.
You want to share your section first? Or should I
Yeah, you can go over there. You want to share? Or do you just want to be a technician?
No, I can share.
Okay. Yeah, since I'm a lip reader. Boy, I remember you. What makes the story a story?
I think the lead up to it, just the fact that it starts with an explanation of two people. I think that's where it just starts. Just the exposition of it, just the way it starts.
Yeah, there has to be some tension in the story. So you have
Tension requires
The way it starts.
two.
Tension requires two.
The way it starts, yeah.
Yeah.
Miriam and I can't remember.
Moshe.
Moshe and Miriam.
Yeah. I'm very clever with my names.
So that's where it starts. As you said, that's right from the get go. It says, "Oh, this is a story about."
I was there all alone.
You were in there all alone?
Yeah, breakout room 2. It was just me.
Well, then you're with us.
Well, Mark and George, you guys were. Yeah.
George,
George,
are you in?
You're invited to breakout room 2 with Mark.
George was supposed to be in breakout room 2 with Mark. How does he get there? He doesn't
I don't know
know.
if George is frozen or he just got a really great background.
Okay,
Oh, Mark, try now.
I need the link.
Yeah. How do I do this? Wait, I'm gonna move you to one room, but then I'm moving you to another room. Don't click that one.
Okay,
There you go.
got it.
There you go. Okay. Impact the system.
Okay. So, um, so
Yeah, you just, I don't know if you ever heard on WLRN on Sundays,
oh yeah,
there's a section where they do the something storyteller.
sure.
And they usually, the stories they tell us, usually somebody's just telling you about their experience.
That's right.
This is different. This is not, it's not a personal experience. I guess those are stories. I don't know how you.
They're telling a tale.
A tale versus, it's a
I mean, it's just technical language now.
I don't know. So that's when you start reading something that to me, like I said, you said, oh, this is a story because it's about two people that nobody knows that it's not a personal experience. It's a relationship.
So, imagine a couple. In every couple, there is tension. Okay. So the wife says, "You're like Moshe. Why can't you be more like Miriam?" So that will happen in some instances. People identify with characters in the story. But it's essentially what you and I were talking about this morning about optimism. There's a toggle switch between the two, and that a person looks at what isn't there and bemoans it. The person sees the potential and is excited by it. It's the same stimulus, but the tendency is one way or the other. And what we were talking about is where do you find, how do you turn that toggle switch? How do you, if you want to make an intervention so that one sees things differently?
I find this could be more challenging. I mean, there are stories like this, and I can't give you an example, where you have person A and person B in opposite perspectives. One, and you as the hearer or examiner of the story sees, oh yeah, this person was this way, but they figured they were wrong, and this person was this way, but they seem to be better off because of their perspective. And it's, or at least to me, they're very obvious. I kind of like the stories that it's less obvious, and you don't initially see that because it's like from the get-go you're setting up a story like this person A, he's down this path, this person B down this path, and something's going to happen where it's going to reveal this person's path maybe wasn't what they thought it was, but this person's path was probably more than what they thought it was. You choose what you like out of it.
You would like a little more complex character development. Yes. So would I. So a story like this would be, stories like this are in my novels, but the novels are character development. And a story like this isn't a novel. A story like this is an inclusion within the novel to convey a lesson. The Curse of Blessing story is inside a novel.
From a literary, what is necessary for it to be a story?
Yes. Oh, you wanted an answer?
I mean,
What makes it a story?
Tension, right? Tension is not, you don't need tension for it to be a story. For this particular story,
you need a beginning, a middle, and an end.
But
stories on the beginning. You know, and I've heard that. I don't know if it's true.
Shall we come back together? We're a minute? How many
Should we
minutes
do a
have we
minute?
got?
We can do it. I'm gonna run to the restroom and then we'll.
Have you been timing?
Good. Do we? We didn't really give it to you. I'll run to the restroom and then we'll regroup.
Hmm?
Okay. I'm just gonna run to the restroom and we'll regroup.
I remember, I keep coming back to the Curse of Blessings because that was the, it surely wasn't the first story that I ever told, but I remember it's okay. I remember how it happened. It happened in a dream. I had to come up with a story for a log boner bonfire. We actually had a bonfire and we actually did all that. And I didn't have a story. So I went to sleep and I dreamed of the story. I woke up Wally. And I said, I just dreamt a story. He says, no, I just dreamt half of it.
One story in that compilation or all the stories?
No, just one.
Just the arrow.
Yeah. So that story was told, and then I went back to sleep and I dreamed the rest of it. And then I told the story for the first time around the bonfire, to good effect. And others.
We're gonna regroup, everybody.
Okay.
We got a minute.
And then other people liked the story. Ultimately, there was somebody read the novel, a publisher, who wanted the story as a separate entity. And we found another publisher to publish it if I could come up with 9 additional stories. And that became the book.
You had to do a lot of sleeping. You had to do a lot of sleeping.
Right.
Wake up. Working.
Okay, we're coming back.
Coming back.
Shalom. 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 No. That was a very simple chant. The words are easy. On Zoom, we can't sing as a chorus, but you can do the chant along with me when you hear it in your room. And when you chant like that, the sound resonates in the various body cavities, and the exhaling is longer than the inhaling. The exhaling goes for 5-6 seconds. Anyone who knows any spiritual discipline knows that breathing techniques are at the heart of the discipline. And this is one of the Jewish meditative breathing techniques. Want to do it one more time? And they're usually done in repetitions of 4. And then there's another secret which I'll share with you. Shalom. 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 Even one such repetition of 4 is powerful. One of our flesh and blood participants was on an ashram for a week, So you've heard any number of ohms. So that should resonate with you. Anybody want to offer feedback on the process, the story, or questions that arise from it, or any other question? You're free to unmute yourself and speak.
Well, one of the things that we discussed was the two different individuals. One is, you can say, very observant, very traditional, set in their ways and their patterns. And focus was on self, where Miriam, it appeared to me that she kind of established a better relationship with Hashem and was very grateful that Hashem looked at her. So her being, when she went out after the storm, wasn't so much, oh my God, it's a disaster. It was like, thank you, I'm still here. And we can make it better.
Okay.
So I was kind of looking at the dichotomy of the two different people and personalities. And I thought it ended great. I didn't see a need to continue the story because I thought it just ended with two different perspectives of how to relate with Hashem and the storm that occurred.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I think a story.
Yeah.
Somebody had a thought.
One thing that came up in our conversation with Edith and me was that both approaches kind of complemented each other. That I wanted to see the story continue because the hurricane was kind of an inner transformation, but then the story needed to finish with an external outer transformation. And that would require, in this context, perhaps repairing after the damage, that the transformation expresses itself. And then the focus on the I in Modi'ani, the I was devastated in the hurricane. It was really kind of a destruction of ego. But Miriam, who focused on the you was still present. And so there was more resilience with her. And then, but I'm not sure how that will play out after the hurricane. Like how, I was hoping each one would discover the other and kind of complement each other in the rebuilding process.
When the Messiah comes. And the lion lies down with the lamb. I think a story like this might be classified as a mashal, as a fable or parable, to show the difference between keva and kavanah, doing things in a fixed fashion and doing things from the heart. Then both have their place. You can't have one without the other. It might be that. The fact that a story comes through me doesn't mean I understand it. At some point, we've been talking about the curse of blessings. I told that story once to a very erudite, very large assembly, and a very well-known teacher in that assembly had asked to have lunch with me afterwards, and we had lunch, and he challenged me in the story, and he said, "Who was this? Who was that? Do you actually know what you wrote?" And it was quite clear that he saw things in the story that I had never seen, and he was quite right. Up to that moment, I did not know what it was that had come through me. So it isn't like a person owns the story. The story comes, in this case, as a result of an interaction with a community, so we all own it. And if I was the last craftsperson to tend to it. So we're learning insight into where stories come from and how they never end. Who would like to volunteer a page number? Daniel, volume 1 or volume 2? Volume 2. Daniel, what page? Page 52.
Volume 2.
In volume 2. So we have books. These books are The Tales of the Hasidim by Martin Buber. Mine is tattered, but then I'm much older, and Adams is new. 52.
Reflective of our experiences with
Hmm?
They're reflective of our experiences with the book.
Yes, they're reflective. How so?
Yours is
Yeah, his beard is black, mine is all right. Wally discovered a picture of me from an earlier era when I was his age. That's kind of alarming. We have 2 stories. We have The New Heaven and On Earth. Which would you like? The New Heaven. Adam, would you read it?
When the rabbi of Rizhin was a child, he was once walking up and down in the yard on a Friday toward evening time, when the Hasidim had already gone off to pray. A Chassid went up to him and said, "Why don't you go in? The Shabbat has already begun." "The Shabbat hasn't begun yet," he replied. "How do you know that?" asked the Chassid. "On the Shabbat," he answered, "there always appears a new heaven, and I can't see any sign of it yet."
I'll read it. Same story. That way we'll hear it twice. These are stories of Rabbi Israel of Rizhin, one of the Hasidic masters, 3rd generation. After the Baal Shem. The title is The New Heaven. It's Buber who assigns the title. When the rabbi of Rizhin was a child, he was walking up and down in the yard on a Friday toward evening time, when the Hasidim had already gone off to pray. Chassid went up to him and said, "Why don't you go in? The Sabbath has already begun." And his response was, "The Sabbath hasn't begun yet." "How do you know that?" asked the Hasidim. "On the Sabbath," the child answered, "there always appears a new heaven, and I can't see any sign of it just yet." Do we need to read it one more time? Because we're going to break into Chavrusa. Okay, this time I'll read it one more time with a little bit of information thrown in. When the rabbi of Rizhin was a child, clearly a very sensitive child, he was walking up and down in the yard on Friday toward evening time. The Krat Shabbat, toward is directional, but it's also looking forward toward evening time. The Hebrew would be the same. When the Hasidim had already gone off to pray, one of those Hasidim, perhaps on his way to shul, went up to him and said, "Why don't you go in too? The Sabbath has already begun." And his response, "The Sabbath hasn't begun yet." And the Chassid said, "How do you know that?" He said, "On the Sabbath," he answered, "there always appears a new heaven, and I can't see any sign of it yet." Okay, hold on to that for a moment. And now on this side, I'm going to add a little bit of halakha. How do you know when the Sabbath comes to an end?
3
Yes.
stars.
When you see 3 stars, it will come to an end. Ha, ha. So, where do you see the 3 stars? In the heavens. So the heavens tell you when the Sabbath comes to an end. How do you know when the Sabbath begins? And with that, let's break into Chavrusa groups again. And you two flesh and blood people are the only flesh and blood people we got. Okay, we'll break in for 6 minutes. So go through the story again. And with that little bit of information that I added, that may throw a different spin on the story than Buber intended, maybe not. Okay? Are we all in breakout groups?
They've all been invited.
You're all invited to a breakout group.
They're on their way.
George, you're invited to a breakout group somewhere? Yes.
Come sit.
What do we do with this story? Hi.
I like this class the most from the couch.
Louder.
I like this class the most from the couch. I like listening to stories and feeling cozy and but so far I like this one the best.
The story.
I like this story.
I like the couch.
I like the couch.
You want to
also.
change seats?
No interest at all, actually.
Awesome. So what do you learn from this story?
I love these stories where it's like you understand the world a little through a child's eyes.
Yeah. Well,
To me,
I wonder how that could be.
It's amazing. I don't know. It's like that. I didn't catch it the first time. And then when you read it the second time, I caught that it was when he was a child. And then it totally changed the whole story for me. I loved it. What did you think?
It takes the child to ask a stupid question like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when the child asks it, it's not stupid.
100%.
No.
What did you think?
I'm thinking of, again, Shai Agnon. Have you read any of his stories?
In
yet?
college, I haven't
In college.
a long time, but
Did you read them in Hebrew? No. His Hebrew is accessible. It's rabbinic Hebrew, not modern, this modern garbage.
Modern is very different. Modern Hebrew is very different.
Yes, it is. Agnon likes, talking through child's eyes. When you cast a story from a child, you're permitted to ask questions that you couldn't ask otherwise.
mm-hmm.
Like, so you have if a father and a rabbi are drowning, which one do you say first? You can't ask that at this age.
I don't know.
Not precisely to the same effect.
It's different, yeah.
You need a principal to get sent to.
You like that one?
I like that one. I like that one because I know somebody, as I shared, one of my good friends also was a yeshiva bacher, also was sent to the, but he wasn't foolish enough to become a rabbi. Yes, so this is a spiritual story that can have really a poetic resolution.
Mm-hmm.
To surrender to it. Now, the obvious question, so how do you know that? Asked the Hasid, and the answer is on the Sabbath. The answer is always appears to heaven, and I haven't seen any sign of it yet. So what's the Hasid's next question?
What does it look like? What does heaven look like?
Well, if when you see a sign of it, what's that going to look like?
Yeah. to me, what resonates is like it's so easy to get into the whatever the day to day. It's Shabbos, we're doing whatever, but without the sense of radical awe, that's what you're looking for something more than that. You know, I don't know. I think kids are not every kid, but I think some kids are able to access that sense.
Again, please.
I think some kids are able to access a sense of radical awe because they haven't been alive enough to get into the mundaneness of life, you know? Things are still so exciting. I love this.
Our teachers, shape them.
Yeah.
They put them into cubicles and hit them with rulers,
Yeah.
whether physically or spiritually.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining the continuation of this story, and so the Chassid says so. How do you know when a new heaven appears? And we have to come up with answers now.
I know. I feel like we have to wake up, Mama.
But it isn't we who have to come up with answers. It's the child who has to come up with the answer.
I know.
Because the child has experienced it before.
That was my question. Because here's the thing. So he's
Louder.
that was a question I had in my mind. So the person's asking, what are you looking for? So either the child was told something to look for,
He wasn't.
or, well, there's anything, like, how do you know when the Sabbath ends? So when you see 3 stars, somebody told you that. So somebody told him, well, the Sabbath starts when the sun sets. So he's looking for a sunset. And he didn't see a sunset. Maybe because it was too cloudy. But that's, so it's either he could be as mundane as that he was told to look for something and he didn't see it.
It's very interesting, right? Either he's sensitive and he's experienced it and he's not seeing it and he knows it's not Shabbat, or he was told to see something. He was told about this. It's a very good point.
He's too young
I
to
didn't
look
even
at.
think about that.
He's too young to look at a luach and see that candle lighting time is 6:28 in Miami.
No, but he might not be too young to have had a rabbi who said there's a special second heaven that we see on
When a
Shabbat.
rabbi speaks to him in childish language, I keep reminded of this is Agnon. He said, "How do you know angels are real?" And he says, "When I was a child, I would come home from shul, sitting next to my father, and the whole table was set, and the soup was steaming on the table, and we would all gather around the table to sing Shalom Aleichem 3 times, and you could see the soup steaming, and by the time we greeted the ministering angels, the soup had cooled down. So clearly the angels are real because it was their wings which had cooled the soup down."
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that nice?
That's beautiful. I love that.
Agnon. We always wondered why we sing Shalom Aleichem 3 times. In Reform Judaism, many congregations don't sing Shalom Aleichem at all. And if they do, it's but once. Now, the tune that Julie has, you do it 3 times. It's there. They did all 3. I don't know people realizing that they're fulfilling the tradition of singing it 3 times. I knew that tune before I came to Beth David, but I had emphasis on different words, so it took a little while to get used to it.
So interesting.
I mean, of course, I was singing it right. Okay, shall we come back together?
Yeah. All right, we're regrouping.
Shalom. 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
It's the dog. It's the dog. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. New? We got a story. In your chavrusas, what did you discover within the story? Or realizations or questions?
Well, I'll start. First of all, I want to thank you for this breakout because I started out with the vision of this child just within his head, not yet mentally prepared for Shabbos as he's walking around. And then George brought up, have you ever seen a sunset? So now I see this child walking, not yet prepared for Shabbos, waiting for the next heaven, which is when the sun goes down and the stars haven't come out yet, but you have the beauty of the colors in the sky, you know, that's the heaven. That's the next second, the second heaven he's looking for to get his kavanah in place.
I'm thinking on it. I'm digesting what you said. Tell me one more time. See if you can express it more clearly.
Okay, you're watching a sunset. And when the sun goes down, you don't have stars coming out immediately. Most of the time, you see beauty of color in the sky. Then the sun goes down, that color comes out, and it's very beautiful. And then slowly it starts getting darker and the stars come out. So for the child, he's wandering around and he's looking and he's thinking and he's getting himself spiritually in the mood for Shabbos. And he does that by seeing that transition in the sky, the sun going down and the colors coming out.
Okay, thank you.
And I said that sometimes the stars appear when the colors are still there, haven't entirely been muted, and it isn't entirely dark, and you begin to see the first 3 stars, which are the signal that something has just happened.
As somebody who's navigated a destroyer across oceans, I assure you, you see the stars before the light disappears.
Yes, that's what I said.
Yes. They are.
I also made the point that you have to remember the latitude in which these people were living when they wrote these kinds of stories, because in the summertime, sometimes it never actually gets totally dark. If you're far enough north, you've got sort of a twilight immediately going into dawn.
I'm not sure whether I did a service or disservice by introducing Havdalah into it. But either way, I did that, and we're getting starry responses. Other thoughts?
We have Daniel and Leon.
Daniel,
Yeah, so we were thinking about.
can we hear him?
Yeah,
Yes.
you can hear. You can hear him. Speak up.
Yes, we were thinking about when the start of Shabbat being 18 minutes before the sunset, and the different customs of when to start Shabbat and whether or not you should light the candle after it started or not, and relating it back to the main character where he felt like Shabbat didn't start for him, and he felt like he was until he felt something, rather than Shabbat starting at the time it's programmed to start for everybody else based on the stars itself.
Perhaps he's too young to read the calendar and see that, in Miami, you light candles at 6:58,
Right.
and that Shabbat for him is a feeling that he has to bring down.
Right.
Right? Is that pretty much where you're at? Yes.
Yep. That was my thought about it. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, well, what I want to say kind of ties into all of that is, so I was thinking from a child, when I was a child, for me, Shabbat started when my dad came home.
Wow. For Daniel, Shabbat started when his dad came home.
Nice.
That was like heaven, huh? Wow. That makes the final cut. Yes.
If I can add, when you're like bowing, like boikala, like that for me was like the moment that Shabbat starts. When you
So-
actually greet Shabbat When you and actually Lachad greet Dodi. Shabbat- Yeah, and Lachad Dodi.
Or with Lechad Dodi when with the last
Yeah,
verse.
yeah, exactly, the last verse.
So with the last verse when you
So the whole congregation kind of turns around and it just feels like this moment.
with the why do you turn around for Lechad Dodi, Rabbi?
I mean, one answer given is that because you turn towards the door.
Yes.
It's not necessarily turning around. It's just, that's where the door is because we're facing whatever. But there's a beautiful Sfat Emet. There's so much about Shabbat, but there's this idea that when we talk about Shabbat, right? Shabbat is a time where we commemorate and celebrate the beauty of creation. Like we have the designated time on Shabbat to tap into that. But the Sfat Emet is a beautiful story. I'm going to do a story. I never do stories.
Please.
I'm going to do a story. There's a story where it was Reb Zushia and Reb Elimelech, who were students of the Maggid of Mezerich. And they used to travel around and they would go and they would lead Shabbat experiences wherever they would go. At the end of Havdalah on one Shabbat, they turned to each other and they said, what if this is all ego? Like, what if it's just because we get people around us and like we're able to tap into this thing? And like, what if there really isn't like a Shabbat? And they said, we have an idea. We'll do it on Tuesday this week. We'll go, we'll do Shabbat, and we'll do what we do on Tuesday, and we'll see what happens. And if at the end of Havdalah, we'll deal with it afterwards. So they go and Tuesday night, they go, they welcome in Shabbat, they greet Shabbat, they dress up, they do all of their Shabbat stuff. They do a nice oneg Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, they do all of their Shabbat services. At the end of Wednesday evening, they do Havdalah. And at the end of Havdalah, at the close of Havdalah, they turned to one another and they said, oh no, we got a problem. And they go to the Maggid of Mezerich and they say, Rabbi, like we felt the same thing. We did it all. We felt the same thing. And like, what does it mean? How do we continue to do what we do? And the Maggid turns to them and he says, of course, because for you it was Shabbos. You experienced it, you tapped into it. He's like, Shabbat is all the time accessible. We just have the dedicated, consecrated time to tap into it on Shabbat. But for you, if you went into it as if it was Shabbat, it was Shabbat. And the Sfat Emet talks about this all the time. He has all this Torah where he talks about how like Shabbat is actually, if Shabbat is about commemorating and consecrating the idea of creation, the fact that we exist right now, right here, there is a glimmer of completion, of creation. The fact that we're here now means that this was created and we get to experience it all, which means that in every moment there's an aspect and a moment of Shabbat. So it's a beautiful story that ties it all in together.
Right. That's intimated actually in the very first line. If you look at the first line of the story, when the Rabbi of Rizhin was a child, he was once walking up and down in the yard on Friday toward evening time. Recall that I made a point that normally toward is something that you do towards a place. What does it mean toward evening time? It's Lekrat Shabbat. So every day is day one toward Shabbat, day two toward Shabbat, day three toward Shabbat.
Toward a place. Hamakom.
So,
Toward a place.
Toward.
Hamakom.
toward Hamakom. Hamakom would be the Holy One. And we in our group had a notion that the story needs an immediate continuation. The Chassid says, the kid says, the Sabbath hasn't begun yet. And the Chassid asks, how do you know that? And the kid says, on the Sabbath, there always appears a new heaven, and I can't see any sign of it yet. And that can't be the end of the story, because the Chassid has to see, so what is the sign that you're looking for? I mean, that question has to be there. Actually, we have this story. He says, for me, he says, every Shabbos for me, my father travels for work. And for me, Shabbos begins when my father comes home. And for me, that's heaven. And my father has been delayed, and I'm walking up and down in the yard waiting for my father to come. And when my father comes, then I'll know that it's Shabbos. Now that's the story. Okay, that's not my story, that was Daniel's story. Well, sort of, it was our story. So it was a feeling. There's a certain feeling that I have to have that I know that Shabbos is here. For 3 stars, that's okay. But Shabbos, when it comes, it isn't as clear as sunset.
Maybe that's why we start. Maybe that's why we started at such a weird time.
We start what?
That it's not such a designated time of when we start.
There's no designated time.
Sunrise, sunset, so we don't have it. There's like a random. It's 25 hours before 3 stars the next day.
Okay, so we have a story here that's continuing, and then the question is for the person who is. We can put this story within a story. I love putting stories within a story. So this is a story that a teacher is teaching Shabbos, ideally, I tell you, you can either have the teaching children Shabbos, or even better, teaching parents Shabbos so they can teach their children Shabbos, which is more the way we used to do it in the Chavurah in the old days. There was the responsibility of the parents to teach the children. Our responsibility as staff was to teach the parents. That we put this story in, and then we finish the story with the story of when the father comes home, and then we say for each parent, so when the Shabbos begin for you, not 18 minutes before sunset, but for you personally, when the Shabbos begin. There are different ways now of putting a story inside of a story. It's been beautiful learning with you tonight. We started with 5 minutes of technical difficulty, but we've taken the 5 minutes away from you in the end. And thank you for that. No?
Beautiful.
And we have a teaching Sfat. Was it Sfat Semis that you learned that teaching from?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you remember the source?
Yeah.
I'd like to see the source. Okay.
For sure.
Wishing you all well. You can stay around and schmooze. You're free to unmute.
Good to see you all.
I had a question. Did an email go out to remind everybody of the discussion tonight?
Let me tell you, Brad.
Wait, let's stop the recording. Hold on a second. Let me stop the recording.